Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome one last time to the closing plenary this time of Hospital Medicine 16. Thank you again for making this such an incredible annual meeting, the best ever and biggest ever that we've had here at SHM. Before we start, I'd like to recognize our 2016 Research, Innovation, and Vignette winners from the contest. Hopefully you saw their posters yesterday outside Exhibit Room B. I'll just name them all real quickly and we can give them a round of applause at the end. In the research category, the best research poster, limiting the number of lumens in peripherally inserted central catheters to improve outcomes and reduce cost, a simulation study by Vinny Chopra. The best research trainee poster, an electronic health record-based severe sepsis alert to improve sepsis treatment performance, randomized evaluation, presented by Ann Downing. And the best research oral presentation yesterday, hospitalist empathy is associated with decreased patient anxiety and higher ratings of communication in admission encounters by Rachel Weiss. Absolutely. The I in RIV stands for innovations, and the innovations winners. The best poster, novel pharmacist-managed rivaroxaben clinic for outpatient treatment of venous thromboembolism, presented by Bailey Crockett. Best innovations trainee poster, designing hospitalist shifts around admission demand reduces patient wait times and cost, presented by Monica Wells. And the best innovations oral session, Open Consult, an innovative approach to subspecialty education. Congratulations to our innovation winners. Presented by Seagram Villagomez. And finally, the V is Vignette. The best pediatric vignette presented by Jennifer Ladd and presented by Alyssa Stephanie. More than just the terrible twos, a case of resistant HSV encephalitis. The best adult vignette, The Tip of the Iceberg, a rare cause of acute liver failure by Molly Cantor. And finally, the best vignette presented by a trainee by Bhakti Shah, Unmasking the Teratoma. Congratulations to all our 2016 RIV winners. So as we barrel into the home stretch for HM16, believe it or not, the fantastic annual meeting committee and SHM staff are already well underway into preparing for Hospital Medicine 17. And I'd like to welcome to the stage the HM17 course director, Dr. Lenny Feldman, to talk briefly about what we've learned in the past couple days. Lenny?
Brian, thank you very much for the introduction. It is wonderful to see that so many people have stayed to the bitter end. I'm so honored that you would stay just to hear me speak about this. I know it has nothing to do with the fact that your flight's not until 3:30, or that you've now been officially kicked out of your hotel room, or that Bob Wachter is following me, so thank you. So what have we learned? We learned it's the year of the hospitalist. And let me hit my slides here. There we go. We have learned that it's not always sunny and 60 degrees in San Diego. We learned that we have a very impressive and thoughtful Surgeon General, and he's a hospitalist. We learned that health is the key to opportunity, that we as hospitalists can make a difference by calling our elected officials, by taking ownership of the opiate epidemic, and by playing a key role in prevention both in and out of the hospital. And we also learned that we should not disparage spinach. So please say nice things about spinach. We also learned about the history of our organization. We learned that inquisitiveness and determination can lead to amazing and unimaginable outcomes in just a 20-year period of time. And we learned that Bob Wachter and Larry Wellickson can be wrong, and even more importantly, can admit when they are wrong. And thankfully, John and Wynn and the rest of the early leaders of our society stepped in, or we would now be called the American Society of Hospitalists, which would have had the kind of startling acronym of ASH. So I think SHM worked out well. We have 3 new Masters of Hospital Medicine, Tina and Eric, and eventually Greg. Congratulations to all 3 of them. Also, congratulations to all our new fellows and senior fellows. It's a well-deserved honor. Enjoy that. And congratulations to all of the award winners, and especially Baltimore's own Tiffany Panic. She reminds us that SHM is truly a big tent and that we can all make an impact in this organization. Congratulations. From our Best in Research and Innovation presentations, we learned that our academic research mission is in good hands with all of the trainees who presented yesterday. Congratulations. We learned that we have extraordinary leaders in this organization. Bob Harrington and now Brian Hart are clearly folks who have led this organization in the right direction and make a difference every day for us. Thank you to the 2 of you. And not everybody got to be a part of this, but we programmed tremendous pre-courses this year that approximately 600 of you attended. And we don't always give shout-outs to the folks who ran these pre-courses, so I just wanted to take a few seconds to do that because they put their heart and souls into these and really do an amazing job for a whole day-long pre-course. So Neelam Soni and Ricardo Franco, who led us in the point-of-care ultrasound, Alan Repp and colleagues, who put together MOC pre-course, Barbara Slosky and Kurt Pfeiffer, and colleagues who put together peri-op medicine pre-course, John Nelson and Leslie Flores, who put together practice management, Josh Lenchus and colleagues who did bedside procedures, and finally Kevin Fellner and Brian Kaufman, who did advanced interactive critical care. We had outstanding content this year. I think hopefully all of you believe that and saw that. You couldn't walk around to too many of the rooms without seeing people streaming out of them because the room was completely full. It is a testament to the work that our annual meeting committee put into all of this. And it certainly is a testament to our staff. And I wanted to just thank a couple of our staff by name. Certainly Michelle Can, Teresa Jones, who has worked with the annual meeting committee for many, many years and has made such a huge difference in programming this event for the last 11 years. Thank you to Teresa. And finally, to Brittany Montemore, who is taking over that role. Thank you all, the 3 of you, for doing such a tremendous job of putting this meeting together. A round of applause for them. And of course, we learned that Larry Wellickson will be around for 3 more years with us. Congratulations to Larry, and certainly this is wonderful for our organization. So a round of applause for Larry. And Larry also looks very short if you take the photo right from the front. And certainly a warm thank you to our annual meeting committee, and particularly to Melissa Madison, who not only changed jobs this year, but also directed the biggest and best annual meeting of all time. So thank you, Melissa. Our HM17 committee is already in the midst of preparing for next year. Hopefully many of you saw our buttons. We're still asking for your suggestions. Come find us at the end of this. Start to give us your suggestions, and feel free to email me. That's a little scary, but feel free to email me with any of your suggestions. We want to hear from you how we can make this better. And finally, thanks to all of you. for coming and spending your valuable time with us. You are 4,000 strong this year. So next year, in Vegas, let's try for 5. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Lenny. For our grand finale, as has been tradition for many years, is to invite back for our closing plenary a man who really at this point for all of us probably needs no introduction, but I'll give him a great one anyway. Robert M. Wachter, MD, Master of Hospital Medicine, is Professor and Associate Chair of the Department of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, where he directs the 65-physician Division of Hospital Medicine. He is the author of 250 articles and 6 books, including his new book, The Digital Doctor, which was the topic of his keynote address last year, in which I'm sure you've all read by now. It was required reading for this year. His blog, www.wachtersworld.org, is one of the nation's most popular healthcare blogs. Dr. Wachter, of course, coined the term hospitalist in 1996 and is generally considered the father of the hospitalist field. He's also a past president of SHM. In 2004, Bob received the John M. Eisenberg Award, the nation's top honor in patient safety, and for nearly a decade, he has been named one of the 50 most influential physician executives in the U.S. by Modern Healthcare magazine. As it is the year of the hospitalist, Dr. Wachter will talk with us about hospital medicine turning 20 this year and how we can chart a new course. And on a more personal note, my own career began 20 years ago under Bob's tutelage at UCSF, and I'm only one of what must be by now hundreds of hospitalists who can trace their professional lineage back to him. So on behalf of 20 years of hospitalists and hospital medicine, please join me in welcoming Dr. Bob Wachter.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you all for hanging out to the bitter end. I think it's been a spectacular meeting, and Melissa and the folks who planned and the staff, thank you for doing that. It just seems to get better and better. I'm also grateful to the planners for framing this as the 20th anniversary, which sort of cements the idea that the field began with the publication of my article in the New England Journal. People say that to me all the time. You're the guy who invented hospitalists. My stock response is, just like Al Gore invented the internet, I did not. And you heard from John and Wynn that there were plenty of people doing this practice well before that article, and I think the article's success was really just giving it a name and a national focus. So there is the article, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time extending some of the themes that we talked about in the opening, but I'll spend most of my time focusing on the future and really some of the lessons from the past and how they inform the future. I thought that opening session for us was a lot of fun. I'm with John, Wynn, and I, and Larry have had sessions like that before. They're usually in bars. They're usually lubricated with significant amounts of alcohol. I appreciate all of you listening to that. I wondered whether it would mean anything, especially for the younger folks. And then later, I saw on Twitter the hashtag 4 old white guys on a beach. Oh, no, that actually was not, that wasn't it. There we go. That's a little bit of the way it felt, but it was an opportunity to muse a little bit on where we've come from, and I hope it was interesting and useful to you. There were 2 things that we left out that I want to spend a minute or 2 on before then we segue into the future. And one we very briefly touched on, but I want to make this clearer, was how controversial this was. You still may feel some of the remnants of the controversy today, but those of us who were there at the beginning know that this was not a wildly popular idea that was embraced by all of American medicine initially. And the second is we talked a lot about one particular policy decision, which in the end of the day wasn't all that consequential. That was the name of the society. But I want to highlight one other one that was important and that set us on a path to many of the successes. So let me just spend a minute on how controversial this was. The article came out, and here were some of the letters to the editor that the New England Journal received and, in fact, published. David Epstein said, "I do not agree that separating patients from the doctor who knows them best at perhaps the patient's moment of greatest need is desirable." Sanford, Gutler said families are confused and unfamiliar with the many intensivists and surgeons they encounter, and when untoward events occur, families are more likely to litigate against physicians whom they have just met and have met under unfavorable circumstances. And William Nakashima said the relationship between the doctor and the patient is being forgotten. These were the kinds of things that we heard, and one of the things that I think we actually did fairly well is to not poo-poo these concerns, but actually embrace them. And personally, I felt like if primary care docs didn't push back on this, that I would have been quite disappointed, because it should have felt difficult and challenging for them the idea that their patient would be seeing a different doctor at a time of great need. It was actually encouraging to me that primary care doctors felt a sense of loss. I learned about this attitude and how challenging this was, particularly for primary care doctors and many specialists as well, from my father. This is my dad with my two kids now. About 10 or so years ago, my father just turned 87, which is actually quite amazing. My father had gastric cancer when I was in medical school, and was told that he had a couple of years to live, and sort of got his affairs in order, getting ready to die, and he's now 87 years old, so luckily the money held out. My father didn't go to college. My father was a small businessman in New York, and was a great admirer of physicians. We grew up in an upper middle class neighborhood in Long Island. There were a lot of docs around. And my father, and a lot of other professionals, and here's my father who didn't even go to college, always felt a little bit insecure about that, and was really a great admirer of doctors. And it was very clear that he wanted his son to be a doctor. And part of my father's sort of a very funny, a little eccentric. When my father would get dressed up to go to a cocktail party when I was a kid, he would look perfectly normal. But then I'd look down, and he would have his garage door opener on his belt. And I said, "Dad, what the hell is that?" And he said, "I'm going to a party. There are a lot of doctors there. They all have beepers. I have nothing." So I said, "Okay." And then my sisters and I would be in the house, and the garage door would be going up and down all night long as my father was showing off his beeper to his friends. So anyway, that was my dad, and he was very proud that his son became a doctor and did reasonably well. And about a year or so after that article came out, my father called me. He'd been playing tennis that day in Boca Raton, where he lives. And he said, "Son, I just wanted to let you know I was playing tennis today, and the guy I was playing with is a doctor." And I said, "Oh, that's cool, Dad." And he said, "And I told him who my son was, and he knows you." And I said, "Oh, that's nice, Dad." And then he said, "He hates you." So this was really hard for my father to take after a lifetime of admiring physicians and believing that his son had helped start something that was wildly unpopular. Over the years, it became more and more popular, but it was interesting to watch the evolution. This is an article that came out in Managed Care magazine 5 years after that article that I'm quoted in as is John Nelson. When first confronted with the prospect of using hospitalists, many primary care physicians experienced real angst about abandoning patients. When PCPs are surveyed, I said, often 1/3 say that they will use hospitalists, 1/3 adopt a wait-and-see attitude, and 1/3 say, "over my dead body." Initially, some primary care docs worried that hospitals would steal their patients, and specialists feared that they'd lose the chance to be consulted for complex cases. Eventually, between 1/2 and 2/3 of primary care docs warmed up to hospitalists. Doctors who resisted the idea 5 years ago have seen that the theft of patients hasn't been a problem. And realized in the early days, part of what drove this was the managed care era, so the HMOs were growing and growing and determining often what happened to their patients. And John said if HMOs would just support hospitals' practice without requiring anyone to refer through contracts or heavy-handed reimbursement incentives, then referrals to hospitals would probably go up enough to delight any HMO bean counter. Most HMOs have, in fact, adopted this approach, he says. And those early days were really quite striking. I remember one of the primary care docs in our orbit at UCSF thought this was the most terrible idea he'd ever heard. "I will never, ever, ever use hospitalists. These are my patients. They need me." And one time he went on vacation, one of his patients got sick, and he decided to let the hospitals take care of the patient. And he called me a week or so later after he got back, and he said, "I tried it. I didn't think I'd like it, but I tried it, and I kind of liked it." And it sounded like he was talking about marijuana. it just had that feel to it. Now, I point this out to you because this was the greatest threat to our field in the early days. The greatest threat to the field was that HMOs and sort of the business side of medicine, the insurers, would embrace hospitals because they believed that it would save money and would do it in such a heavy-handed fashion that it would screw up this idea that we were trying to promote, that this might be a better way of organizing care. We're not sure it's a better way of organizing care. We should study it. But no primary care doctor should be forced out of the hospital, because we thought, can you imagine what a disaster that would be? It was beginning to happen in 96, 97, that Aetna or Prudential would send a letter to the primary care doctor saying, as of next month, you no longer can take care of your patient in the hospital. You must hand the patient off to the Aetna or the Cigna or the Prudential hospitalist. And can you imagine the feeling the primary care doc would have about that, what the primary care doc would say to his or her patient about this new arrangement? We thought this was a disaster. And it was kind of funny. The press was surprised that we pushed back on it because the press said, well, that's got to be great for your specialty. But I think there's a lesson there about being really thoughtful about the angst that others have about what we're doing and making sure we try very hard to sit in their seat, to sort of wear their shoes for a while and understand where the angst is coming from and not be too chest-thumpy. And I think this was a big deal for us. And so the first policy statement, you've heard about many of the amazing policy contributions that SHM has made, the newest one being the new billing code, which is fabulous. But the first policy statement that we ever made as a society was a complete and utter and unambiguous rejection of mandatory use of hospitalists. This is from the ACP Observer in May 1999. In part to protect the interests of internists, the college, that's the ACP, formally affiliated last year with NAPE, as you heard about in the opening session, a medical association of hospitalists. The NAPE, which was established in 97, has 1,000 members, and there were about 3,500 hospitalists at the time, 50,000 now, supports only voluntary patient transfers, which is also the college's position. And here Wynn said, a mandatory system doesn't allow for the natural progression of evaluating the model and deciding whether this would be a good thing for you to use for your patients. And with Whitcomb, it immediately creates a situation where a would-be referring physician resists it. So we made a lot of moves early on. There were a lot of questions that were flowing at us faster, almost faster than we could deal with. But this was really a very central one. And I think if we had blown this, we would have lost the support of the rest of the House of Medicine, and that would have been a terrible move. Of course, today we would have done this very differently. So if you think about the world as we inherited it back in 1996, there was the hospital and there was ambulatory practice, and the primary care doc went back and forth between both of them. And what we basically said is if that link is cut, it needs to be done voluntarily. And we emphasized from the moment that we started, we emphasized the importance of communication and connection between the hospitalist and the primary care doctor. And not just communication, but respect and making clear to the patient that your regular doctor is very important, we'll be in touch. Now, and so you see sort of these two groups now being separated, and that's what our field did quite intentionally. Today, of course, we'd build a huge, beautiful, classy wall, and we'd get the primary care docs to pay for it. But luckily, we didn't know that technique at the time, so we did something very different. So let me just make clear, I think Larry had said that in the first session, we made a lot of, I think, pretty good choices and decisions that worked out well. And it's a metaphor for many of the same decisions and challenges that we face today. There are obviously new issues, but similar kinds of change and complexity that we're facing today. But I want to make clear how easy it was in certain ways. The deck of cards that we were dealt was unbelievably favorable for the growth of this movement. And here's some of the reasons why. At the time, there was tremendous pressure from managed care to it created a burning platform for cost savings. I want you to think about that because I think the same thing is true today. We don't call it managed care anymore because as a society and a system we decided we didn't like managed care, we didn't like HMOs, so we've rebranded that as ACOs and bundled payments, but it's essentially the same thing and we're feeling the same kinds of cost pressures, so people are going to look to us or others, again, around that burning platform. The old inpatient model, the model of the primary care doc coming in and out of the hospital, was clearly massively inefficient. The doctor was not there all day long. Patient would stay 1 or 2 or 3 extra days because of that inefficiency. There was a large reservoir of general internists and later family physicians and pediatricians who really were not very happy with their work and looking for something different to do. It's very interesting. It turns out to be quite important. I've spent a lot of time in the United Kingdom in the last few years, and they are trying very hard to build a hospitalist model, but there is no reservoir of generalist doctors who are comfortable with the hospital. In the UK, if you're a generalist, you tended to become a GP, and you only do ambulatory practice, and you really barely step foot in the hospital. If you're an internist, you almost always became a subspecialist. In the US, we were markedly advantaged by having a pool of generalists who thought this would be a kind of cool thing to do and who were very well trained to take on this role. If you think about if you're an internal medicine doctor particularly, your residency trained you very well to be a hospitalist, probably better than to be a primary care doctor. There was no need for major structural changes, although we later embraced the idea that there needed to be additional training, that there needed to be a credential. That's why we pushed so hard to create the credential with ABIM and family medicine. And I understand something may be happening with pediatrics as well now. At the time, there was no need for anything fundamentally different. You could be an internist or a pediatrician and say, I'm going to take care of hospital patients, and you had the qualifications you needed to do that. It wasn't as if there was no controversy around that. It wasn't as if there were some hospital credentials committees that tried to block hospitals from being able to do this work. But there was no fundamental structural readjustment that was necessary to allow the field to flourish. And we also recognized that the hospital was a deep pocket, had money, had very important incentives, and had a set of aligned incentives, largely because of DRGs, that we could take advantage of. If we could say to the hospital, having us in the building would save money and certainly not harm quality and maybe even improve it, then the hospital could be a source of funding for this movement. Here's some of the decisions that I think we got right. And again, I tell this to you not to sort of spend too much time in the past, but I think they're relevant to where we go, how we go forward. We appreciated that hospital support was key. I actually want to emphasize that a little bit because as far as I can tell, that need for hospital support has not gone away, and yet it doesn't come up that much in conferences like this one. We have to think very carefully about what are the needs of the hospital. In some ways, you think about some of the speakers, we probably should have more hospital CMOs and hospital CEOs and hospital boards to truly understand their needs, because those really are crucial for what we choose to do. We studied and then ultimately published evidence of benefit. We created and very purposely created a big tent. That big tent played itself out in the formation of the society, making sure that we welcome pediatricians, family physicians, ultimately welcome non-physician providers under the tent, and just as importantly, made it a home for both academicians and community physicians because we thought there would be a lot of synergies. I still believe that's highly relevant today. It's something that we have done that is quite unusual in the world of societies. Most societies do not hold together when they try to put in the same room community docs and academic docs. Their interests diverge too much. And I think that is therefore a huge loss to the field. I think there's a major amount of cross-fertilization. And one of the things that we recognized early on was community doctors in hospital medicine really needed to understand data and research. They were making the case that having hospitals was a good idea. So their interests were not, and the skills they needed were not that different than many academicians. And the academicians needed to understand the way the money worked and the way practice needed to be organized. So I think our field was a little bit unique in that the needs and interests and skills for community doctors and academic doctors were not all that divergent. I think we tried very hard to be collaborative, optimistic, friendly, but not to be stepped on. And that's obviously a tricky sweet spot, but I think we pulled it off reasonably well. We wanted to be kind of a can-do group. We're here to say yes, we're here to try new things, do new things, and yet when we're being asked to do something that's unreasonable, or we're being made to feel like second-class citizens, or we're going to sort of write the notes for the orthopedic surgeons but not be involved in care in a meaningful way, no, we're not going to do that. So that was a tricky balance I think we got right. We embraced the quality, safety, and value movement big time. As soon as those movements became things, really with the IOM report, launching it in late '99. We fully embraced it, and we said that is what this field is about. We focused on geography, meaning that up until us, there was no tradition of physicians kind of hanging around on the floor and working collaboratively with the nurses and the case managers. And we said, no, that's where we need to live in order to improve care and improve value. We expanded our scope, but we did it thoughtfully. We didn't take on things that we were unprepared for or didn't want to do. But we recognized that if we were locked in and said, this is what a hospitalist does, and we put a hard box around that, that was a bad call. And I think that ultimately has been a good decision as we've taken on new and interesting activities. And as you've heard throughout this meeting, and I'll come back to it in the end, a major emphasis on creating leaders. Just to highlight a few of these things, here's the research. And I tell this to you now because I think it remains equally relevant today. At the end of the original New England Journal article, what I wrote with Lee was as with any major transition, the medical community must constantly reevaluate the new approach to ensure that any possible discontinuity in care is outweighed by better outcomes, lower costs, better education, and greater satisfaction of patients. Today, the shorthand for that is value. So basically, we said, we think this might be better, but we don't know for sure that it's better. And immediately, we and others set out to study it. And this was the original study that my colleagues and I published in JAMA a couple of years after, and Brian may remember what we called at the time, believe it or not, our hospital service was called the managed care service. That's how dominant managed care was in our thinking about the world. So we divided the wards up into two groups. Those who've been at UCSF will be amazed at this. There were 4 ward teams at the time. So today, if you add up the non-resident service, there's probably the equivalent of 11 teams or 12 teams, but there were 4 ward teams at the time. And we just divided them in 2, and half of them we populated with hospitalists, half had the traditional service. And in a study design that I don't think you can get away with today, and certainly not get published in JAMA, but at the time it was considered state of the art, patients got randomly distributed to a team that had a hospitalist or a team that didn't, and at the end of the year we looked to see how we did, and it turned out the cost savings and length of stay savings were self-evident, almost a penicillin-like effect if you see the benefits. And we also demonstrated that it came at no cost in terms of quality or safety, and trainee and patient satisfaction was neutral, and trainee satisfaction actually went up. There were a lot of other studies that looked just like this in the early years, and this research became very, very important. Just going out there and saying, this is a better model, we're really wonderful, we care about the right things, I think would have gotten us not very far. It was very important to make the case and then to show data that clearly made people understand that it was real. This is another study that was very important because we had a number of audiences. Not all of them were selling a hospitalist idea to a hospital, let's say, or the medical world. We were also trying to sell it to ourselves and to trainees and to convince people that this was a career path. I remember hearing in the early days people, young people saying, that's a job that's like a super resident. Why would I do that? I want to go out and be a real doctor. And my stock response was, if you think about it, the idea that a job taking care of desperately ill patients with a pace that fast, with the kind of ethical questions that you confront every day, where with a stroke of a pen you can spend or waste $50,000, the idea that we consider that to be, that's what a resident does, but a real doctor takes care of patients in the clinic, that's just ridiculous. It just happens to be that is what a resident did because residents were cheap labor and we organized our training model that way. But we had to convince people that this was a real and sustainable job. We also heard in some of the early meetings people saying, this field is going to be just pure burnout. You'll do it for a couple of years and then you'll burn out. I remember saying that to one of our early meetings, and one of the doctors who had just become a hospitalist raised his hand. He said, "You want to see me burn out?" He said, "Put me back in my clinic practice. I will burn out in about 5 minutes. This is actually quite enjoyable and interesting." And so this was one of the studies that came out. I think Wynn and John both were co-authors on this, but this is a sociologist from New York, studied our job satisfaction of this society in 1999, and you see the rate of burnout was quite low at the time. I think the study was very important. It really was evidence that this field might and should be sustainable. I knew always that it was not going to last at this level of job satisfaction because in the beginning it was incredibly exciting and new, and you can't count on that forever. But I think these data were very important in driving people to come into the field. Other things that I think we did importantly and well, the society ultimately formed a journal which has grown and done amazing things. Many people here have worked on or published in the journal. And one of the earliest things the journal published was the core competencies of the field. So it's a new specialty. If your specialty is, we've invented a new procedure, you don't have to pay much attention to the core competencies. You are skilled in doing that procedure. But when your specialty is a generalist field taking care of patients in a certain place, you actually have to be clear about what the field is about. And so this document, the core competencies, published in 2006, was really highly influential. It was one of the key elements that we had on the path to becoming a legitimate specialty. And you'll see here that this was not about taking care of sick people in hospitals. It was about minting a new kind of physician who cared deeply about the system and making the system work better. I remember soon after, around the time of this document, actually probably a little before, we started a residency track at UCSF, for a hospitalist residency track. And we ran it, and we used this kind of information to say, all right, they're going to learn, they know how to be good inpatient doctors. They're going to learn change management and quality improvement and patient safety and end-of-life care and transitions. And we'd run it, and then I'd get a call from the residency director who would say, oh, we need to teach all of our residents that. And eventually we took down the track because we recognized that what we had built was a really good internal medicine, forward-thinking internal medicine residency, that the competencies that we have articulated in this field are actually the competencies that everybody needs to have. It's just we were in there first and made sure it was a core part of the field. This was a moment where I knew that we had made it. The New York Times had an article now 6 years ago talking about a new breed of specialist steps in for the family doctor, and it was really all about hospitalists. And here were two portions of it that I thought were quite meaningful. Because she was on the floor all day, she was able to schedule a long meeting with a man who held power of attorney for a patient close to death and incompetent to make decisions. Expansive and gentle, the doctor discussed why she would recommend a transfusion, but not a feeding tube. So we were already thinking about things that we do that don't add value. And so part of what that says, we had successfully branded ourselves as being about presence, we're there all day long, and expertise in a certain area around end-of-life care, around empathy, around communications, around things that patients might benefit from, but things that patients might not benefit from. Very important, not to get too Madison Avenue-y, but a very important branding for the field. This is the way we want it to be seen by others, and the only way you do that is you articulate it and then you just go out and do it. The article went on and said, medical experts have come to see hospitals as potential leaders in the transition to the Obama's healthcare reforms. Under the new legislation, hospitals will be penalized for readmissions, errors, and inefficient operating systems. And that really was, again, our brand being as system improvers, as being the people at the vanguard of making healthcare better, safer, cheaper. So I saw this article as maybe at the end of our initial phase of making clear that we're new, we're doing something really important. So in the words of the late Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, I've told you about all sorts of wonderful stuff here. Golda Meir once said, don't be humble, you're not that great. So there's a risk that we will have our Golda Meir moment, because I think we have done a lot of things really, really well as we look back on 20 years. And I want to shift really to thinking about the future and what these lessons say about where we should go and where we might go. So as I've reflected on what we've got wrong in the last 20 years, I think it's a really short list. It's an amazingly short list. Here's one, and I may be, in saying this, maybe offending some of you who feel strongly about this, but I think one thing we got wrong was a 7 days on, 7 days off schedule. I can't prove that. I have no data to prove that. But I believe the 7 day on, 7 day off schedule is the schedule you would create for a 30-year-old finishing residency taking his or her first job. Because, wow, what a great thing. I'm going to work 12 hours a day, 7 days, and I have a whole week off. What could be better? Now, where the 7 day on, 7 day off schedule came from was when we looked at analogies, like what is hospital medicine like? The closest fit we could come up with was emergency medicine. It's a very similar dynamic, a generation earlier. There's this site of care. In the beginning, there were no ER doctors. There's this place. Sick people go into the place. A nurse tucks the patient in, takes the vital signs, and calls, believe it or not, the primary care doctor to come over and take care of the patient. And a generation before us, people said, that's crazy, that doesn't work. We're going to have doctors come in. And after 10 years, the ER world figured out what its schedule should be. And you know what it came up with? It came up with 10 or 12-hour shifts. It didn't come up with 7 days on, 7 days off, because that would be impossible. But so it came up with 7 days, it came up with 12-hour shifts or 10-hour shifts. And maybe you did it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you worked about 15 shifts a month, sometimes 14, sometimes 13, but somewhere around half the days you did 10 to 12-hour shifts. And in emergency medicine, of course, a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule is just fine. In hospital medicine, it's a disaster. And so we basically said, okay, cool, 10 or 12-hour shifts, you'll work as many days in a row as you possibly can because we want to maximize patient continuity, until about the day that you want to kill yourself, and then let's subtract one. And that turned out, for a 30-year-old, to be 7 days on, 7 days off, you work half the days of the year. It seemed like a perfectly reasonable idea, but realize at the time that this was formed, pretty much every hospitalist was 30, 35, maybe 40. I don't believe this is a viable schedule for a 60-year-old. And there may be some 60-year-olds out there doing this schedule and happy as clams, and God bless you. I don't think it is. But yet we've become stuck on this. We've said that, if you're not advertising at this schedule, I'm not taking that job because I really like that schedule. I think we've shot ourselves in the foot, because what it means is you take all of the work that needs to be done and you shove it into a very small amount of space, and therefore the amount of intensity in that work that you have is, I think, undoable over time. And so I hope we rethink that. I hope some of the folks that do research here maybe study alternative models to see whether we can come up with a model that I think is more sustainable. We don't want a model of care where we just know it's just fine for a 35-year-old but not doable for a 55-year-old. Now, one of the things we're seeing, of course, is a lot of 55-year-olds are morphing into work as consultants, work as CMOs or quality leaders, and sort of buying out of their clinical work. And that's fine, that's natural. I think that's actually a very healthy trend. But what you don't want is that you have to do that. There's no way you could possibly do the core clinical job as you become 20 or 25 years into this profession. So I do hope we think that. My personal belief is that was a mistake, a well-meaning, understandable mistake, but I think we're no longer a new field. I think it's a good time to take a look at it. So that to me is sort of feels like a real error that probably that needs to be rethought. Here's another error. It's the only major error I think SHM has made. Larry, one of the jobs that Larry has, and Larry has been magnificent when John and I hired Larry, now 17 years ago, and it was probably the best decision we ever made. But one of the struggles you have when you're running a society is, how do I deal with industry? We need money to run things and do cool stuff, and how do we draw the line? And I think Larry and the society has done that incredibly well and walked that very tightrope beautifully. The one time that Larry screwed it up was one year, maybe about 10 years ago. I came into the conference hotel, and the name of a hospitalist consulting company was on my pillow. I did not like that. so that went away. We haven't done that again. But I think that was probably the only sort of major strategic error that I can think of SHM making. Otherwise, it's really staggering how well the society has been run. And I hope you're all, you understand that, again, that didn't have to be so. There were a lot of opportunities for strategic mistakes. And I think we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Larry because we've made so few. And I forgive you for the pillow. So thank you. Thank you, Larry. And those of you who were in Las Vegas 3 years ago, I don't know how you could look at this and say this was not a mistake. So this was me doing my Elton John thing at the, yes, I agree with you. And I'm aware that we're going back to Las Vegas next year. So let's sort of switch. That's a lot of back think, and I know you're here to think about the future with me. So how does the past inform the future? I think the overarching principle of value-driven and patient-centered care has been our legacy, and I think it needs to continue to be where our focus is in the future. Improving systems is key, and that we need partnerships and the big tent to do that well. System improvement work cannot be done individually by doctors, and there is a skill that I think we have been the leaders in bringing people together, convening people, working collaboratively across professional silos, and that has to continue. Data are crucial. There's a point where you can't just say we think this is a better thing to do. You actually have to show it. And again, one of the key moves that we made as a society was embracing research as part of what we do. And those of you in full-time practice who don't do research, you might sometimes wonder, should I go to a research session? Should I support the researchers? Some of my dues money is supporting researchers. Is that reasonable? The answer is yes. The answer is yes, because we need folks doing research, bringing data, answer important questions. That is the way the field advances. We have to continue to be collaborative and team players, but not pushovers. We have to know when the right thing to do is to say no. We have to own the territory, just as we sort of said the ward is where we live and we're going to spend our time there and collaborate with people in a new way. But I'm going to make clear that it's no longer, first of all, it's no longer just the ward, and second of all, it's no longer just physical geography. We need to expand our scope, but we need to retain a sense of focus, and that's actually a concern I have that I'll talk about in a minute. And we need to innovate, innovate, innovate. We're now 20 years old. This is about the time that professional societies and professions begin to die. And they begin to die because the passion of the early years is gone. It's now we're protecting our own turf, and I've seen this play out with other societies and other fields, and that stagnation in turf protection is the preamble to death. We've managed so far to resist it, but it's really going to be crucial that we continue to do that. And the minute it begins to feel like, let's keep doing what we've always been doing, and as others are coming in from other angles, and we say, no, we're hospitals, we're doing our thing, we need to instinctively say, wait a second, am I turning into all those other societies that have become irrelevant or less relevant because of that reflex? I think we've done a great job prophylaxing against that, but it continues to be important. Let me talk about a few elements of this future thinking. I think I showed this slide a few years ago, but it sort of makes the point well. I was talking to the medical students at UCSF now a couple of years ago, and I said to them, I don't know why, but I was in the mood to shake them up. And I said, you folks are entering a profession utterly different than the one I entered 20 or 30 years ago when I went to med school, because you will be under unrelenting pressure to deliver high-quality, safe, satisfying care at the lowest possible cost. I was trying to shake him up, and one of the students raised his hand and he said, what exactly were you trying to do? And I remember that question all the time, because those days that we all have where we say, God damn, another quality measure or another imperative or MIPS or macro or, it's all coming at us, and it's uncomfortable and it feels in some ways wrong and some of it's wrong-headed. Remember that what's odd is not that we're being pressured to improve value. What is odd is that it's new. What's odd is we're going through the growth phase and the learning phase of how do we measure value, how do we improve value. What's weird is that we're trying to figure this out now. Of course, that's what we should have been figuring out for the last 50 years, but we had a different payment system. So this is the future. We have to get used to it, and we have to lead and not just moan about this, even though there are clearly times when we get it wrong. I had an op-ed in the New York Times a couple of months ago where I just sort of lambasted all the quality measures and talked about how we're hitting the targets but missing the point. Clearly we have not gotten it right, but the answer is not going to be leave us alone, let's go back to the way we were and unfettered autonomy. That can't be the answer. We have to work to make this better. I think I mentioned this last year, but I want to re-emphasize it now because I think it has a real message to us. To me, we are in the middle of two tremendously transformational trends, maybe the biggest ones in my entire career in medicine. One of them is the one we talk about constantly, which is the pressure to deliver high-value care. The second, which I talked about last year and obviously wrote about it in a book, is that our healthcare system really, just in the last few years, has gone from a system whose primary unit of information flow was the piece of paper or the Post-it note, or the fax machine, or the 3-ring binder, to one that is essentially completely digital. It's not everywhere, but about 85 or 90% of hospitals now have electronic health records, so do primary care practices. So we, in a very short period of time, have gone from analog to digital. If you ask me today what the dominant issue is, and I'm acting chair of our department, so running a big department with 1,000 doctors and struggling with how do we do our work better, the issue I struggle with every morning when I come to work is how do we provide higher value care? How do we provide care that's better and safer and less expensive and better access and more satisfying? Really, if you walk around the halls of this meeting, that's all we're thinking about, and that's really important. If you ask me 10 years from now, I am guessing that the fact that we've just gone from analog to digital will have turned out to be the bigger transformation. And the reason I say that is if you look at the history of every other industry that went from analog to digital, eventually the industries got turned upside down. If you look at our industry and whether our industry has gotten turned upside down yet by computerization and digitization, I think the answer is no. I think, first of all, it's not very good. It's certainly not ubiquitous. It's not all connected. And so we're using these tools in fairly rudimentary ways, and they're pretty rudimentary tools. But I can tell you that nobody in the hotel industry saw Airbnb coming. Nobody in the taxi industry saw Uber coming. Nobody in the retail book or shopping business saw Amazon coming. Certainly Kodak or Olympus didn't see the idea that we all have fantastic phones that can take pictures now. None of them saw it coming. If you think that digitization is going to leave healthcare alone, you're wrong. And part of the reason you're wrong is this is our healthcare spending as a percent of GDP. We are an enormous target. Silicon Valley has woken up to the possibilities of healthcare, and they are just waiting to disrupt healthcare the way they've disrupted everything else. I think the hospital world is going to be somewhat insulated from this. This is first going to impact ambulatory practice through telemedicine and patient-centered information technology and Fitbits and monitors and sensors, but eventually it's going to transform all of medicine. We need to own that. We need to be in the middle of that. We need to embrace that. I was pleased to see that we have a section in this conference on health IT. I think it's got to be a bigger deal because it turns out to be a crucial part of the healthcare world. One of the things about digitization that has become uncomfortable is the way it has transformed practice, and I kind of like this video, so let me just show this to you.
Honey, look. He's playing doctor.
How's it going, Doc? That's Doctor, all right. Better leave him to it.
So does that look familiar to any of you, that this is our life? We have to fix this. I mean, maybe Epic and Cerner and Athena and other companies will get a little bit better. Maybe we'll push back on the regulators and the quality improvers to think about the measures and take some of them away. Maybe we'll rethink the billing system. But ultimately, we need to own this and fix this. And here's another thing that we need to be thinking carefully about. In the old days, I've gone to a lot of sessions here about how do you change physician practice behavior and education and guidelines and all that. Well, this is the future. So you're going to go to your computer and you're going to say, here's my patient with pneumonia or heart failure. I'm going to deliver my favorite antibiotic or medication. And it's going to tell you that guidelines suggest that you do something different. And you'll say, okay, sure, no problem, but I still want to do my favorite thing. And you're going to click to enter, and the next screen will say, what is your reason for deviation? You may already have a health record that does this with decision support. So you can deviate from the guideline, but you need to tell the computer why. And you say, yeah, here's some reason. I'll make up a reason, and I'll still put in my favorite therapy. And then you'll say enter, and now the third screen will say, please call the chief medical officer for approval. So any of you who are CMOs, your job has just become a little bit harder. But the CMO's a good person, she'll be fine with this, no problem. And then you'll say enter, and then the last screen will say, are you some kind of a moron? This is the new battleground, and the reason I show that to you is I said in the early days we kind of owned the geography of care. We embraced the idea that the ward was we had to be there and live there and collaborate with all the people on the ward. Increasingly, the geography of care will be on the computer. So much of our care will be determined by what happens coming in and out of this box, that we need to make sure that there are enough of our folks in the specialty that live in this world, that understand this world, that connect between the clinical care and the improvement work that we're all doing, but understand sort of the underbelly of how this enters into the IT world. I think that's going to become increasingly important. I'm going to spend a moment on burnout. That's been a theme of this meeting, and I think that we're beginning to see some of it in our own field, although probably a little bit less than in other fields. This is a very important study that you probably saw, came out in the Mayo Clinic proceedings last year, and it looked at the rates of physician burnout and a standard survey that they've been administering for several years. And It shows not only the overall rates, but the increase between 2011 and 2014. You may not be able to read all the groups, so let me just show you a couple of key ones. One of the key points is 2011 is orange, 2014 is blue, and every field has seen a major increase in burnout in just the last 3 years. Here are some of the fields. Remember, we talked about 7 on, 7 off, or working 15 shifts a month, how wonderful that is, and we kind of modeled that on emergency medicine. Emergency medicine is the field with the highest rate of burnout in the United States. I think it's not all about those shifts, but I think it's partly about those shifts. So I do think we need to rethink that. Radiology and dermatology. Now, I think they did not understand the question. But, I mean, look at the burnout rates in radiology, and particularly at almost a doubling of the burnout rate in dermatology. So there is no field, even the fields that we all think have won the game, bankers' hours, they make twice what we make, my God, there's no field that has been insulated from all of the pressures that people are feeling. And for those of you that are internists, general internal medicine comes out fairly high on the scale, subspecialty medicine comes out somewhat lower. This survey did not look at hospitalists as an independent entity. There was a survey done a couple of years earlier that showed our burnout rates in the 30-ish% range, but it was a 2011 survey. So if we're following anything like this, we're probably up to 40-ish% burnout. The overall burnout rate among American physicians was now higher than 50%. That is higher than virtually every other profession. So this is an enormous problem. We need to embrace it, not embrace burnout, but embrace the importance of trying to fix this. And one of the things we've done very well is to sort of say, all right, here's our world today. We need to rethink it. We need to come up with some new practice models, using information technology in new ways, collaborating with other members of the team in different ways. We have to take this issue and figure out a way of solving it. Let's sort of spend a minute or two on the economics of all of this. The economics of hospital medicine remain very dependent on the hospital being a relatively deep pocket to help support hospitals' practices. There are some of you probably that make a go of it completely on professional fee billing, but the average practice gets significance in the tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars per FTE from the hospital. So here's my fear, or the way it works. In general, hospitals give money to hospitals' practices to make the practice whole. What that allows us to do in many cases is provide people reasonable salaries, an average daily census that's not crazy, a tolerable schedule, as I say, don't love 7 on, 7 off, and time to do this other work that we all have embraced so readily. This has been a circle that I think has been a relatively virtuous circle as long as the hospitals think that they're getting their money's worth. Increasingly, I'm hearing that they feel like they're not. And I know that there's some consultants in the audience who are sometimes called in to help figure this out. And the way that sometimes looks is, all right, we're giving them money to do this important quality improvement and value improvement work that you've kind of sold us on, but we don't see a whole lot of that happening. We see them coming in, doing their shifts, and going home. So there's a deal here, and we have to be sure that we're holding up our part of the bargain. And with tangible and intangible results, sort of measurable results, but also the sense that the hospital and its leaders have that they're getting back a return on their investment. Here's the concern. The concern is hospital dollars are being squeezed and will be increasingly squeezed as Medicare tries to figure out how to not get bankrupt, as businesses try to make themselves more competitive, insurers cut payments. And on top of it now, you have new models of hospital funding and physician funding as well, but hospital funding that are increasingly value-based. And on this slide, it shows that by 2018, Medicare payments are supposed to be up to 50% in these alternative payment models. All of this leads to, nobody's going to make more money. The question is, if you want to make the same money you made before, you're now going to have to do that through performance rather than just RVUs. So the hospitals being funded that way, their inclination will be to shrink the amount of dollars they give us. We need to figure out new ways to add value, which is something we have always done as a profession. But if it's just the old ways that we've done and we don't innovate and come up with new ways, then I think the threat is real. If we do come up with new ways of adding value, then I actually think we'll continue to do very well. So here are just pieces. Remember I said the key, we may want to articulate the argument, but we need to show data that make clear what the real answer is. This is a very important study that came out a couple of years ago from Christiana, published in JAMA Internal Medicine. We've been talking about, the right average daily census is 15 since the early days of the field. Where that number came from was an early survey of NAPE, where we asked about 12 of us, what's your average daily census? We said, it's about 15. We then said, okay, that's the right number. Frankly, we had absolutely no idea what the right number was. Over the years, that number became kind of embedded in mythology that that's the right number. There were no data to support that being the right number. The problem is, if there are no data, what happens is, because of the economic model, the hospital says, well, you should be able to take care of 16 or 17 or 18 or 20. And if you think about it, that is exactly what happened in primary care, where there were no data that say that a reasonable visit for a person with multiple comorbidities has to be 20 minutes or 25 minutes or half an hour. There were no data to support that, and so eventually, all right, it used to be 15 minutes, we'll make it 14, we'll make it 13, and eventually primary care became undoable. I think that's where we are now. That's why there's so much burnout. This study is incredibly important, because what this study says is 15 isn't the right number because we say it is. The data show that once you get above 15, the average length of stay and the costs of care go up. It's actually there's a return on investment at keeping that number around 15. These are the kind of data that we have to continue to think about, produce, support, because they really do influence the shape of our jobs and the way we're able to make contributions. We also have to continue to innovate and support innovators, and that's one of the things that's so great about this meeting. You walk around and you see the energy that's going into new practice models, new ways of thinking about solving important problems. We have to continue to do that. And there's another model that is out there. You may have seen this article in the New York Times from a couple of months ago about, and there may be some folks here from this hospital in Oregon, where they were being pressured to be more efficient, and their response was to unionize. That may be a reasonable thing to do, but I worry about it. I worry about it because in many ways one of our secret sauces here has been collaboration with our colleagues in leadership positions in the medical centers we work in. And the minute we form an adversarial relationship, that gets compromised. Now, do we want to be doormats? Do we want to be walked on? Of course not. If the jobs we're being asked to take are ones that we think are not allowing us to do good work for our patients, then we have to take action. And folks in my group know I have this email that's called the nuclear email that is just ready to go when the hospital says, we just can't afford to give you what you're asking for. We're going to cut it by X hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then I've only used it once or twice over the years, but it's sort of the email that says, okay, that's fine, but here are the things we will no longer be able to do. We can't just accept cuts, but I think the idea of creating this adversarial relationship, we've got to be very, very careful about. And I think so far, the better approach has been to continue to demonstrate the value that we bring to the healthcare systems that we're working in. So the central issue regarding support, I think, is we shouldn't be arguing for support because it's in our interest for example, a health system or a medical center support us. We have to argue for support because it's in the interest of those that we're negotiating with, that it would be you, hospital CEO, you, healthcare system CEO or board, you would be making a dumb decision for you to not give us the support we need to do the work that we're capable of doing, but we have to make clear what that work is, and when we say that's what we're going to do, we better go out and do it. And that's what happens when we're solving their problems, even some problems they didn't yet know that they had, and I think that's something we've done quite well, anticipating where the puck is going. That said, sometimes we need to play hardball. So let me sort of segue to the end and make a few final comments. Here's why I'm not all that worried. I think that we have proven ourselves to be pluripotential people who are able to take on new tasks, not be too fixed on what the job is, and we've also done it with a can-do attitude, that we'll do what's needed. And if you think about the litany of things that we currently do that were not on our radar screen when we started, we didn't really have a whole lot of co-management. The role of system improvers was not a central role. The work we're doing on cost reduction, information technology, transitions. I think a quarter of the folks at this meeting spend a significant amount of their time in skilled nursing facilities. So we've taken on all sorts of new roles, and I think that's been crucial. That said, we have to be careful about scope creep. And as much as I enjoyed the Surgeon General's comments, I think we've got to be thoughtful about taking on, I mean, I have people in my group who do a lot of work, for example, in population health. That's a part of their job. But I'm not sure that's our job to fix the world of prevention outside the hospital and SNF. And we've got to be careful about boiling the ocean and trying to do everything. The hospital and its associated elements remain really important, really complicated. And I think there's probably enough work for us to do while focusing in that world. Though some hospitals will close, there's no doubt in my mind that in the next few years we'll see hospital closures. Those left standing will have large and robust hospitalist programs. I'm not anticipating a whole lot of job loss in our field when you look at the advertisements for hospitalists. While there's been no question, and as I listened to the Surgeon General, this sort of just solidified it, while there's been no question that there's been a shift in the center of gravity from the acute care setting to outpatient home care, telemedicine, population health, that's an appropriate shift. There's been too much emphasis on acute care, not enough emphasis and funding for the rest of the care and prevention. That's real. I think that for the foreseeable future, hospitals, post-acute care will remain vital and a costly part of the healthcare system. And I don't think we need to sort of lose our focus and say we're going off into that world wholeheartedly. If we can, or some of us do, that's fabulous. But if we begin sort of becoming something for everybody, I think we'll lose the special focus that made us successful. And I think our field will continue to produce leaders and innovators, and we need to continue to produce data that say, we're not just saying that this is a better idea, we can show that this is a better way of organizing care. And with those of you if you did look at my book, I talk a fair amount about the productivity paradox. This is a term coined by Eric Brynjolfsson in 1993. He's a professor at MIT. And what Brynjolfsson was talking about was the phenomenon of digitization in all sorts of industries, where, all right, computers are coming into manufacturing or financial services, and they're going to transform care, make it better, or not transform care, but transform the work, make it better, make it higher quality, make it less expensive. And then the computers enter, and nothing happens. And I think we're seeing a version of that now in healthcare, where now we have computers, we expected tremendous gains in quality and efficiency, and we're not seeing all that much yet. And it was captured in a very nice quote by a Nobel Prize-winning economist now 30 years ago, who said, you can see the computer age everywhere except in the productivity statistics. Meaning in certain industries, certainly not healthcare at the time, but certain industries, you see computers everywhere, but we're not seeing the gains that we expected. And then in about year 10, things start getting massively better. And that's when you start seeing the enormous gains, and you think about Amazon and how it's transformed your life, or think about Netflix, think about your iPhone. You begin to see the enormous gains, but it takes about 10 years to achieve that. And what Brynjolfsson and others who've researched that say that, to me, I liken this to a safety deposit box. The two keys for fixing the productivity paradox. One of them is the technology has to get better, clearly. But the second turns out to be far more important. The second is that you have to reimagine the work. You have to ask deep, fundamental questions that basically start with, why do we do it this way? And if the answer is, because we've always done it this way, you're wrong, and it needs to be fixed. And so I've been thinking a lot about this in the last few days, because one of the themes of this meeting, one of the things I've actually seen quite a bit at UCSF and elsewhere, is that hospitalists, one of the things we hoped for the field was people would be hospitalists and lead hospitalist groups, and ultimately they would then take on leadership roles throughout their systems. And just this morning I saw a bunch of the people from my group who've taken on major leadership roles. This is Russ Kusina, who is the Chief Medical Information Officer at UCSF, runs our IT system. Amy Parrick, who runs our population health work. So she is someone who has changed her focus somewhat, but remains a hospitalist. This is just what she does for the strategy of UCSF. Diane Slifka, some of you heard this morning. Diane's done a magnificent job thinking about patient experience and also provider experience. Adrian Green is now the Chief Medical Officer of UCSF Medical Center, a hospitalist. Chris Moretas, who many of you know. Chris has been a central figure in value work at UCSF and elsewhere. Neeraj Sehgal is now the Chief Quality Officer at UCSF. So these physicians, I'd say these are 5 of maybe the 10 most influential physician leaders at UCSF, all from the Division of Hospital Medicine. If you think about it at a national level, the chief medical officer of Medicare, as you know, is a hospitalist, and as we all saw quite thrillingly, the Surgeon General is a hospitalist. I always thought about that as, wow, that's a wonderful thing because now people from our field are taking on these important leadership roles. But actually, just this week, I reframed this in my own mind because I think it does two things. We have a whole class of hospitalists now graduating into larger leadership roles and essentially leaving the field of hospital medicine narrowly and now taking on a larger role within healthcare systems. That's really important because seasoned leaders bring hospitalist sensibilities and their background to these important roles, but it's just as important that they're clearing out the seats for new people to come in and change the world of healthcare. And so I think the other thing it does is as these folks graduate onto leadership roles, their roles begin to open. And so we now have younger people come in who ask those productivity paradox questions. They say, why are we doing this way? And if the answer is because we've always done it this way, it's those young folks that will be the ones that say, no, that's not right. We need to think of a whole different way of doing this. That's why I'm so confident in the field. Not only are we minting leaders in the health system, but we have been successful in bringing in young people, and I met a lot of them at this meeting, who are seeing the opportunities that exist as those seats open up and are going to teach us how to reimagine care. So let me end back where I started. So when this article came out, got a lot of buzz, the field was growing quickly, and people were saying, well, this is kind of cool, it's interesting. And I remember in about '98, I held a conference for hospitalists, and I expected maybe 100 people would be there, and about 500 people showed up. And I was waiting to go out on the stage, and you know, it was amazing. The buzz was incredible, and it was clear that we had a tiger by the tail. And my wife said to me, are you sure this is a good idea? You know, you've obviously helped build something that's going pretty viral. Are you sure it's a good idea? And what I said to her was, it is a good idea, and it will be a good idea if we are successful in recruiting and retaining young people, innovative people who want to change the world. And so I think we have done that, and I thank all of you for turning this into a good idea. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you, Bob, for your wisdom, wit, and insights as we turn 20 this year. And as everyone starts to leave, please remember to get your course evaluations completed. They will be sent to you via email. You'll be directed to the SHM Learning Portal to complete those evaluations. So thank you in advance for doing them. We really appreciate your feedback. You can print your CME certificates as well. And then lastly, be sure to save the date for Hospital Medicine 2017, which will be in Mandalay Bay, May 1st through 4th in Las Vegas. You can sign up already right outside, and we'll see you in Vegas.